All right. Thank you, John. All right. I just threw in the chat. ECTA has worked for, seems like forever, but it wasn't that long on cultivating a list of effective recruitment and retention strategies that state and local programs have been using across the country. And at the end of last year, we just put the initial grouping of about 120 into a state strategies database. And I'm going to try and get us there quick. Let's see if, can you guys see that? It says recruitment
Yes.
retention on top. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So this is part of our recruitment retention sort of initiative and webpage. Last year, we did a synthesis. We put together a bunch of one-pagers around six sort of key strategy areas: compensation, loan forgiveness, grow your own. But our newest piece of this is our state strategies for recruitment retention search page. So you'll see at the top that this is an ever-growing list. Our goal is to keep growing this and cultivating this list as it goes forwards and as states begin to implement new strategies. So we encourage folks to submit new strategies, which is right at the top. So we have a process for that. But you'll see we sort of broke it down into the broad search criteria that includes strategy area, which includes those six broad areas around recruitment and retention strategies. Personnel targeted, you can do a search specifically on personnel that you want to focus on. If you want to look at specific states, or if you are like Illinois and you're neighbored by like 7 states and you just want to see what your neighbors are doing, you can search by state. You can do it by agency or organization. That might be the lead agency. Federal, our funding source: federal, private, state, local funding. Was there an equity focus? And then is it a short or long-term solution? So I'll do an easy search and just do grow your own. Won't put anything else in there, and you'll just see how it pops up here. So you'll see it pops up.
Ted, I think
there.
you're still showing your PowerPoint actually, and
Oh, I am. Okay.
you mean to
Sorry.
be showing your
I need to be
browser.
sharing screen, not page. Got it. All right. So share screen. There we go. So this is sort of what the end result looks like, and I'll flip back here in a second and show you what the page initially looks like. But you can see we capture just an overview. You can get a brief description, see who what the funding sources are, who it is for, what type of agency organization, and then what is the intended impact or measurement of success. And then we try and link a source to each one so you can go to their specific website. So let me take you back real quick because you didn't see what the actual page looks like. So you can see it's just a state recruitment and retention search. At the top, you can submit new strategies, and then you can sort by how you want to do it as far as grow your own, leadership advancement opportunities, et cetera. So I'm going to close out of this and get us back to our presentation. So I don't know if you guys had a chance from what we sent out to take a look at it, but if you do and you have any questions, or if you want to add some strategies that you're working on that aren't on the list, I would encourage that. So any questions right now? All right, we're going to move forward. All right, to Sun Young.
Thanks so much, Ted. The resource I was just looking at, it's really exciting. So thank you so much for sharing about that. So I want to share a few updates from OSEP. So the functional behavioral assessment guidance is one of them, but I also want to make sure that everybody received the save the date email for the OSEP conference, OSEP summer conference. So the dates this year are going to be August 5th through the 7th of August. So if you didn't get that email, let me know. I can forward that, save the date to you all. And the other thing is, you all, if you're the project director of the project, you should have received the APR package, annual performance report package. So the APR season has started, and the due date for APR submission is, I think, the first Friday of May. I cannot remember which date it is this year. So you should have access to the APR package. And in the last a couple months, OSIP has been busy with the education department to publish some useful guidance documents. So the functional behavioral assessment guidance is one of them. So as Ted said, it was published in November, and it's composed of several sections. It's pretty easy to follow. It's not like long hundreds of pages of that type of documents. It's kind of like more like a booklet, and it's easy to follow. And the contents include what is a functional behavior assessment, what composes a functional behavior assessment, and what are some common characteristics of an FBA and behavior support or intervention plan, and how can an FBA be used to inform instructional strategies for children with disabilities and without disabilities. So the key message from the guidance at this time is that it can be used for all children, to support all children in the function-based support and continuum of support. So that's why it was published by not just by OSIP, but also Office of Secondary and Elementary Education. So that's one of the key messages. It's for everyone. Of course, when it is used for evaluation purposes within the IDA, it requires parental consent, but it can also be used in other education, everyday classroom settings to support everybody's learning. So I want you to check those out. I strongly recommend. And if you want to kind of dive into deeper into the document, we can find a time later during the COPs too. So just let us know. Take a look at the guidance and let us know what you think. And there are a couple other guidance documents I want to share. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. So the first one is the Dear Colleague letter on personnel retention. So this goes well with what Ted just shared, the resource, ECTA resource. So I want you to check out the Dear Colleague letter on personnel retention. And then the last one I want to share is about inclusive educational practices, and it's also a guidance document. So I put the link in the chat as well, building and sustaining inclusive education practices. So check those out, share what you think, and we just wanted to make sure that everyone has access to these guidance documents and resources. That's it from me. Thanks, Ted.
All right. Well, we are now pleased to have our guest speaker, Darby Ann Shannon, talk to us about practice-based coaching. And Darby Ann, I'm going to let you share your slides. So
that sounds good. So I'm Darby, and I'm at the University of Florida with the Anita Zucker Center for Excellence in Early Childhood Studies. And I'm really excited that we are a small group because I'm hopeful that I can respond to what you're hoping to learn on today's call. And so were there any, sort of burning questions that folks had about coaching just before I jump into those slides so that I'm being as responsive as possible?
Well, I know that you're really focusing on coaching for pre-K, but we, in a different part of our grant, are focusing on, we are focusing on coaching elementary ed, special ed, and general ed teachers in math instruction, research validated math instruction for students with disabilities. And so we've created a structure. In our last director's webinar, we had John. You're going to have to remind me who the speaker was. I don't remember, but I loved her slides and I loved the content of her slides around really more the systems approach to coaching. And what we're really doing is at the school level. In fact, I would say we're really focusing on the coach at the school and the teachers at the school. And we have some fidelity tools that we're using to train the coaches on, and then with the teachers. And again, this is not evaluative. It really is about improving practice and building capacity. And in this case, we've got two really big areas, which is special ed interventions, and then, of course, general ed math instruction to students with disabilities. So I don't know what that looks like at the pre-K level, but I would love to hear from you what that would be. And I guess that would be the topic that you're presenting on. So I'm very curious as to how we potentially could scale to pre-K our current coaching work.
And there are multiple levels to think about. And I think y'all had maybe somebody from NERN that talked a little bit about that systems level coaching. And so I'm going to focus
Rebecca
primarily
Hornak, yeah.
on what's happening between the coach and the coachee. But we find that the practice-based coaching framework can be used at multiple levels to coach classroom teachers, early intervention providers, or even to coach coaches or administrators. And so there are lots of different applications. So we'll definitely cover that. Any other specific kind of burning questions or aspects of coaching you're hoping we'll talk about? All right, I have time for you to share your thoughts as we go through. So let me just pull up my slides. And are they showing the right way? Okay, good. I never know if I'm going to get the presenter or the participant view on your side. So we currently have at the University of Florida and with our collaborators at Vanderbilt University, a model demonstration grant from OSEP, and it's called Practice-Based Coaching, Data-Informed Decision-Making. And so practice-based coaching has been around for a long time, but we have really built on that to think about how can we be intentional about gathering data about the coach efforts and the impacts or effects of those efforts. And so, of course, we're always really thankful for that funding and support. Pat Snyder, Maureen Conroy, Jennifer Harrington, Mary Louise Hemmeter, Sarah Basler, Kirsten Kinder are other members of the team. So I'm just sort of representing some of our work. And of course, for everything that we do, we're really thankful to have great administrators, coaches, practitioners, children, and families who have given feedback on practice-based coaching. As well as the effective practices like embedded instruction and pyramid model that are often the focus of practice-based coaching. This work wouldn't be possible without having really great collaborators from states and local organizations like your own. And so our plan today is to give kind of an overview of what is the practice-based coaching framework. What do we mean when we say an effective practice for practice-based coaching? How do you do a match between the delivery format of coaching and the early childhood context? How do you gather data using a coaching log that can measure your coaching efforts, including how much coaching is happening and the quality or how well it's occurring? And then we'll look at sort of that systems level that Georgette mentioned about really building an infrastructure to make sure that coaches are supported so that when they're engaging with practitioners, they're able to be really effective. And then we'll end with questions. And so with that, practice-based coaching occurs in the context of a collaborative coaching partnership. It's really responsive to that practitioner's strengths, needs, priorities, and preferences. It's not evaluative. It's not telling that practitioner or coachee what they need, but really letting them tell you about what their priorities are for the classroom. It's focused on effective or evidence-based practices. And the reason we chose to use effective versus evidence-based is that we know that evidence-based practices are about what works on average for a large population of children. But we also have to consider what works in that individual classroom based on the culture and the community of that classroom. And so we think about those effective practices as things that have evidence, but are also a good fit for that context, for the children, families, and teachers that are being served. There are a couple key parts of the practice-based coaching framework. And so we have shared goals and action planning. Those shared goals are informed by data about the effective practices. Both the coach and the coachee brings information about strengths and opportunities for growth. They develop together that shared goal and action plan, and that informs the focused observation. And so anytime you go into a classroom or a home environment, there are a million different things that you could look at. But when we're doing practice-based coaching, we're really focused on the practices, things we can see and hear and observe when the coachee is engaging with a child or engaging with a family. And so as part of that collaborative partnership, we're not giving feedback on everything. We're giving very focused reflection feedback based on the shared goal, what you and the coachee have identified as most important for your current work together. And so we have a number of studies that have shown that when you implement these components and implement them as intended, we've had positive impacts on not only teacher or practitioner practice, but also child outcomes. And so a couple of different models or frameworks that have used practice-based coaching that you may be familiar with are embedded instruction for early learning. So embedded instruction is really focused on thinking about embedding instruction on IEP goals and everyday activities and routines. And so with that, we help classroom teachers kind of break down those IEP goals and think about how do they provide intentional embedded learning opportunities and everyday activities and routines. Pyramid model, I understand Lisa was just here to talk with you guys a little bit more about that. Best in Class is a tier 2 intervention that's used in pre-K through 3rd grade. That's really about reducing challenging behavior. Practice-based coaching has been promoted through the Head Start National Center for Quality Teaching and Learning and Development Teaching and Learning, I think is what it's currently called. It is used nationwide in Head Start. So if your state is partnering with Head Start organizations, this is likely something that they are familiar with. And then, of course, we have our current PBC-BIDM work, practice-based coaching, data-informed decision-making. And so practice-based coaching was initially established back in 2007, but has been used widely across a lot of different settings to support young children and families and the practitioners that work with them. And so with that, I'm kind of curious, is anyone using practice-based coaching or another coaching model that's a named framework?
The model, well, again, it's not in early childhood, it's in elementary ed. The model we're using is Jennifer Pierce's model that she and Kim St. Martin described in their book. So it's really two things. It's instructional coaching, but it's also coaching to a process. And it could be, it's both individual or team. So systems coaching as well as, individual coaching. So that I'm not sure how else to describe it, but perhaps somebody else can chime in.
And oftentimes what we find is that across different coaching frameworks and models, whether you're using practice-based coaching or something else, there are some common features, right? Typically setting a shared goal, right? As part of that framework, engaging in reflection, having opportunities to receive feedback about what's working well or what you might do differently. Anybody else?
We do have the pyramid model in Connecticut. And right now it's primarily being implemented in our community preschool settings, and we're really trying to look at how we could expand that to our LEAs. That's something that we're looking at with our state leadership team for pyramid. And then with our state inclusion team, we are beginning to explore how we could use coaching to help support inclusion. So when Georgette shared this meeting today, I was really excited to comment and to hear more about the coaching models and just trying to really think about how we can use this to support, inclusion in our state and really looking at LRE for early childhood.
Yeah. We did quite a bit of work in the state of California through the embedded instruction for early learning. And they encountered the same thing, really thinking about meeting those benchmarks around LRE. And so we had a couple different models that we used. We had some classrooms that were co-teach, where they had a gen ed and a special ed teacher together in the same classroom. And in that situation, we had an external coach coming in to support them. We've had situations where we've had itinerant special education teachers, and that's the model that we're using in Pennsylvania, but we also use in California, where they come in and they sometimes are the coach and they're coaching around inclusive practices. And then we've also had, as you guys mentioned, sometimes like a group coaching situation where there might be multiple teachers that are coming together because they have a shared interest or they're in the same location and they're receiving that external support around how can you use those inclusive practices to embed instruction on IEP goals in everyday activities or routines. So it definitely can work in that context. And so with all of the coaching work, one of the things we think is most important is identifying what your effective practices are, because that gives a shared language to the coach and the coachee. And so when we say effective practice, what do we mean? We mean things that are observable. You can see them, you can hear them. Measurable. They're written in a way that two people could walk into a classroom and agree that that practice has happened, or walk into a home environment. It's feasible, it's realistic for that context, and it's aligned with the outcomes that you want to see for young children. And so if, for example, somebody said, I'm coaching this teacher around having an engaging classroom environment, I would say, well, tell me more about what that looks like. What specifically do you want that teacher to do that's going to help it to be a more engaging environment? And so we get a little bit more narrow, and we might say, one way to engage young children is to provide a choice of materials. And then the coach and teacher together are setting that shared goal around what are opportunities during circle time or small group time or center time, where you can provide intentional choices for children to be more engaged in the ongoing activities and routines. And of course, that might be tied for some young children to language goals, right? Where children are, responding to stimulus items or using their words to ask for things. And so when we're looking at this, make a classroom schedule. What do we think? Is that a coaching goal? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Make a classroom schedule. Let's check. Can you see it? I can see it. Is it written in a way that two people could agree when it occurs? Is it possible for the coachee to implement in a practice context? Do you want the teacher to make this schedule while the kids are running around? No. Making the schedule is something that might be a step on my action plan towards a goal of referring to the visual schedule on at least 3 occasions throughout the ongoing activities and routines, right? Because we really want our coaching goals to be about the implementation of practices that we can see and hear with children or with families. And I think sometimes coaches and coachees get stuck in making the things, when really what we want to focus on is how do you use those things to benefit young children or to benefit their families. And so not quite there yet. What about describe my actions as I'm doing them using self-talk? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, yeah. I can see it. I can hear it. I could take data on it. It's feasible in most contexts where young children are. And it is definitely linked to those child outcomes that we want to see, right? We're modeling language for them, building vocabulary. So absolutely. What resources are you guys using to identify practices? We say we're a pyramid model coach or a literacy coach or a math coach. What are we really coaching folks to do?
Well, I'll just speak to what we've been working on in math, elementary ed math, and that is their high leverage practices for intervening with students who are struggling in math and using the math standards, but especially research that shows particular strategies are effective with students.
Yeah, and I know the Cedar Center, which is the NOSEP Center, right, has really nice lists of high leverage practices. Those would be perfect to kind of plug in as that shared language and focus for coaching in the elementary setting. Absolutely. Other sets of practices or places where y'all are looking?
I'll promote some of the ed published documents, like, our evidence-based practices documents. IES has What Works Clearinghouse. They have a lot of information on evidence-based practices. And some of our guidance documents, as I introduced earlier.
Absolutely.
And I'll promote DEC recommended practices too while we're at it.
DEC recommended practices for sure. If you are doing pyramid model, you may be familiar with either TPOT, the Teaching Pyramid Observation Tool, or Tippy Toes, which is the infant toddler version. Those are great places to look for practices. But we think that that part is so important because when you're trying to establish a strong collaborative partnership between a coach and a coachee, that gives them something that's a shared language, right? That they're on the same page and they're able to, set those goals that everybody understands where it is that we're going. So we think that those are really, really key. Y'all had a couple questions or thoughts about where does coaching happen and how does coaching happen? So we think about that as the delivery format of coaching. So in practice-based coaching, the first thing we think about is who's the coach? And so the blue side of this kind of cube that you see on the screen, in PBC, the coach could be an expert coach coming in, right? Like that itinerant special education teacher coming in to support inclusive practices. It could be a peer. So maybe you have a lead teacher in the classroom who's coaching paraprofessionals. It could be that you have a teacher across the hall who you're able to kind of pop in and share things with. Or you could be self-coaching, where maybe you have an external team where you're talking to them about what it is you're trying to accomplish, you're setting goals, and then you're going back into the classroom and you're trying to work towards those goals, but you're reflecting using, maybe a video of your own practice, or a reflective journal, where you're thinking about, am I personally meeting those goals in the way that I intended? Then we think about, on the green side, are we going to have that coach work with an individual or work with a group? Individual for coaches is often the easiest place to get started, but we have some learners who actually really love to learn alongside their colleagues to hear, how is it working in different contexts. And the group can be composed of a classroom team, right? So like I mentioned, sometimes we have 2 teachers in a childcare setting, or we have a gen ed and a special ed teacher that are co-teaching. And so it might be a team of folks in the same classroom. Some of our work in Pennsylvania, we have teams of folks that might include related service providers that are part of the team that's engaging in coaching, which is great. We love to see that. It could be a group that has been brought together because they have a similar or a shared need. And so it might be that everybody in the group is working on, how to establish classroom roles. And so that's the reason why we brought them together, because they have a shared need. And so they could be coming together on a bi-weekly basis in a community of practice or something like that. But we're still engaging in all the key parts of the cycle, and that we're setting a shared goal and an action plan. There's some kind of focused observation where data about what's occurring is being collected. And then you're engaging with the group in reflection and peer feedback. Just as long as we have that data either coming in the form of things they've taken themselves, or maybe a video or something like that that's being shared. And then finally, the yellow side is that delivery format. And it could be live, like you're going into the classroom to observe, or it could be video, like they're taking a video of their classroom. It could also be that you go in to observe live, but you meet by Zoom. That happens sometimes too. And so the reason that we set it up in this cube format is that there's not one right way to do coaching. As long as you have the core elements that are part of that framework, you're engaged in a collaborative partnership. You have shared goals and action plans. There's some kind of focused observation where data is being collected, and there's opportunities for reflection and feedback. You can really be responsive to that individual learner, as well as your available resources, and still have confidence that you're implementing practice-based coaching with fidelity or as intended. And so we think that the versatility of the framework is something that has been really important for the early childhood sector when we're working across lots of different environments, different configurations and setups. And so with that, I'm going to just turn back to you guys to see if you have any questions about, delivery formats or how we make that feasible. Anybody using a coaching platform or like video, anything like that?
I've not me, but I've heard Teachstone does a lot of those things. Have anybody heard of that stuff? They do a lot of early childhood things. Mm-hmm.
So Teachstone has something called My Teaching Partner, where they do video feedback. There is, if anybody is working with Head Start as one of their inclusive environments, they have something called, I think it's My Coaching Partner. It's had a couple different names. I'll send it as part of like a follow-up to John and Ted. They can make sure that they get that to you. But there are a variety of different, coaching platforms. Torch is one that's used a lot in early childhood. And what's nice about that is that when coaches and coachees indicate that planning time or time to meet is a barrier, and it can be, right, when we have short-staffed classrooms, if there is a video, then the coach can leave sort of reflective prompts or comments on that video, and the teacher can go back at a time that's convenient for them to review that feedback and maybe respond to those comments. So that can be beneficial sometimes. But just know that there are lots of different formats, and sometimes when you encounter a barrier in implementation, which is going to happen when you adopt something new, a different delivery format might be the answer to that barrier, or a way to kind of work around it. So within our current model demonstration project, practice-based coaching, data-informed decision-making, we have 4 components. So the first one is a PBC DIDM implementation profile. The profile has 60 indicators on it, and it really guides a leadership team and a coach community through how do you install coaching. So at the foundation, it's really about like, how do we even get coaching in place? What are the core elements we have to have? The initial is about sort of building the capacity of that coaching team to begin collecting data in a systematic way about their coaching efforts. The mid-tier is making sure that when we have coaching data, effort data, and effect data, that we're using it together to make data-informed decisions, right? Not just am I coaching, but is my coaching making a difference? And then the advanced tier is taking it all the way to the child level and saying, how do we look at our child data and map backwards to say, if this is what our children need, what do we need to see in our classrooms? And if this is what our classrooms need, what do we need to see at coaching? And if this is what our coaches need, what do we need to see at the leadership level to make sure that's happening? Effort and effect data is thinking about what measures do you have to look at efforts, how much we're doing, how well we're doing it, and are those making a difference? We situate those in that systems level, effort and effect cascade. And at any one of those sort of arrow intersections between efforts and effects, we want to be engaging in the prepare, look, think, act process. And I know through the Daisy Center, there are some great resources on look, think, act. But we also think that that prepare piece is pretty important, because if you don't know where your data is or how to get that data out of the system, then it's really hard to look at it, think about it, and take action. We also think that if you don't have a really clear decision about what it is that you want to figure out, you can easily become overwhelmed with your data. And so we think having that clear decision and preparing the data in a very focused and intentional way to answer that question is really, really critical. But for the purposes of today, I'm just going to focus on those two in the middle. So when we think about efforts and effects, efforts, we often want to know how much coaching is happening and is it quality coaching, right? And when we know those two things and we're making an investment in coaching, we also have to say, are our efforts making a difference? And that's where you're taking those effective practices and you're actually measuring in some way, is coaching having an impact on the coachee's use of effective practices? And that could be something informal like a checklist, or it could be a more formal observation measure like class is often used in early childhood. Now, class doesn't have practices per se, it has domains and dimensions, but you could map the effective practices that you're coaching on to align with that measure. But either way, it's really important that we're measuring how much coaching is happening and if it's making a difference. One thing that I think all the early childhood model demonstration projects that are focused on coaching has talked about is the value and importance of a coaching log. Coaching logs are important for collecting data, but they're also really, really critical as a guide for implementation to help the coach ensure that they're implementing whatever the coaching framework is with fidelity or as intended. And so this is just an example one, and I'll drop it in the chat at the end of today. But the front of it includes a lot of information about how much time, how many days, how many activities, right? And so we can get information about how much coaching is happening. But we also really have to consider if that coaching that's happening is of high quality. Does it include the kind of important ingredients or key features that are part of that coaching framework? And so within practice-based coaching, as I mentioned, reflection and feedback are really key. And so you can see here that we have, indicators that a coach could use to plan for their meeting, but also to check off, was I sure to provide supportive feedback about what they're doing well related to the practices that are on their action plan? Was I sure to provide constructive feedback about how they could grow their practice? Again, related to the practices that are on their action plan. And so this helps us to get a measure of quality or how well the coaching framework was implemented as intended. And so any questions or thoughts about coaching logs?
That's
That was
about
oh,
logs, but I have a question for you, just a little bit, or add on. Some of the, like I think Vermont and maybe Rhode Island have early childhood and as part of their SPIDIGs. And I think they're using like conscious discipline as part of their early childhood work that they've been doing. So I was just wondering, like, how might coaching logs or some data collection work for those people? If that's the coaching and the training that's happening, what might they be able to look at?
So if you're using conscious discipline, what you would want to think about is, do we have a set of effective practices that are aligned with conscious discipline, right? Because that's really the content in the middle. But as far as what you're doing in the coaching process, that's the same, whether you're coaching around literacy or math or social emotional. That coaching process, we really want to be consistent no matter what effective practices we're plugging in the middle. So the coaching log I'm sharing could be used and has been used by programs I know in Florida and California to coach around conscious discipline. It's just, they really had to think carefully about what are the practices, right, that we want to see, that they're observable and measurable. And so with that coaching data, as a leadership team, your effort is to teach your coaches what the coaching framework is, right? As a state leader or as even a more local district leader, you want to make sure that you're providing your coaches with training about what's the coaching framework and what are the effective practices that are in the middle of that framework. The coaching log is how you measure those efforts, right? So you're looking at the coaching log, you're looking at the goals that are being set. Are they focused on the area or practices we want to focus on? When a coach is doing that effort and doing it well, then we're looking at, are they having effects on the coachee or the practitioner? And that green box of effects under practitioner, that could be teapot, tippy toes, practices aligned with class, practices aligned with conscious discipline. But we want to have a measure of, are we having the impacts that we want to have? Because when we are, and practitioners are using those practices, then their effort is having an effect on children and families, having an effect on those outcomes that we want to see. We know that if you are also working in the early intervention space, you might have to think a little bit differently about that coaching piece. And so, for example, in the state of Florida, we have a statewide initiative, and our coaches are actually not supporting practitioners in a classroom, but they're supporting early intervention home visiting providers, right? And in that situation, we actually don't want that home visiting provider to be working directly with the child. We want for them to be building the capacity of the family to engage in those practices with the child, whether the home visitor is there or not. And so that is one piece that is a little bit different if you're in that EI context, that we try to be really thoughtful about. And the coaching framework that we use for our providers or practitioners to support families is aligned with practice-based coaching, but it is a little bit different because we want to be responsive to a family's context. And so I know in Pennsylvania and in Florida, they use what's called the SUPER framework. And I have some resources I can share with you about that as well. So how are you supporting your coaches? We know that coaching is only going to have an impact if our coaches are really well prepared and supported. And so what are some things you're doing? Do you have coaching logs, coach community meetings?
Well, again, I'll speak to what we're doing. We have a summer institute for a week where coaches are required to attend. And in that week, we cover basically the fidelity tools, the research validated strategies, and instructional coaching. And then during the school year, we have monthly communities of practice. They also receive support from our regional service center coaches. So we have both special ed and math coaches who work with the district or school-based coaches. Because the school-based coaches also turnkey this training with their colleagues in also a community of practice or PLC format in terms of more of a sharing of professional learning around the strategies that we're using as it supports the teachers who are being coached. So there are logs. We don't want to over focus on the logs yet because this is our first year of implementing this model. So as we like to say, we want to go slow to go fast. So, but there will be a need for them to kind of address what it is they're focusing on in the coaching sessions, whether they're instructional coaching or coaching to a process related to the IEP or progress monitoring. So
Yeah.
that's what we're doing.
And I will say, one thing that I've noticed with a lot of programs I've worked with their coaching logs is coaches oftentimes are used to sort of just taking anecdotal or running record notes about what's happening in that coaching conversation. And that's good because it helps the coach to remember, what they talked to that coachee about. But what we found in practice-based coaching data-informed decision-making, the PBCDIDM project, is that we couldn't only have those qualitative notes. And so as you're thinking about your coaching log, I think one of the biggest things to think about is what kinds of data, right, am I able to look at a school level, a district level, a state level, when coaches are using those coaching logs to guide their practice and document what's happening. And so when you're setting up whatever data system you have, you'll want to be really thoughtful about, is that going to help us to answer the questions we want to answer about, is coaching primarily happening only during playtime? And so one of the groups we worked with, they realized that coaches were only going in during center time. And that was a great time to observe in an early childhood classroom because a lot of things were happening. But they weren't really taking advantage of the teachable moments that could happen during a meal, right? And until we looked at their coaching log data, we weren't able to see that overall sort of pattern and to bring that back to the coaches in their community of practice, not to tell them they'd done anything wrong, but to actually turn the data back to them and say, here's the trends we're noticing about the activities and routines where coaching is occurring. Let's talk some more about that. Look at the data, think about it, and then decide as a team, are there actions we want to take related to including other activities and routines in our coaching schedule? Or is it something that we as your leaders need to do about thinking about your coaching caseload or where we might have assigned you or the formats that we're using? So I think the biggest thing with a coaching log is making sure that it has the variables that are going to let you answer the questions you want to answer at multiple different levels. Thanks for being the sharer, Georgette. You've gotten me just up and running on lots of different ideas. I appreciate that. What about other questions related to anything coaching?
Darby, I'm just very grateful to hear your presentation today, and it's really tied to all those 4 core things: observable, measurable, feasible, and tied to really child outcome.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of our SPDIC projects, like we ask our projects to include a child outcome, but with professional development, how they tie child outcome to that, that's a struggle for many projects. So but PBC really makes it very clear and provides tools to look at, like, if effective practices and look at it whether it ties to child outcomes. And I just so appreciate your presentation today.
Well, I have up here practice-based coaching, data-informed decision-making is pbcdidm.com. I will tell you, we are just coming to the end of that model demonstration project and getting ready to post lots of resources. So it will, like when you get there, it'll say sign up for our mailing list. So please do that, knowing that things are coming. My email address is there, and I'm going to stop sharing and just drop those resources I mentioned in the chat. And so I have the slides that I can drop in there. So if those are helpful. I have the coaching log. And then we have just a list of recommended resources for early childhood. And so some of them will look really familiar, some may be new to you, and we hope that you will share them with the early childhood folks on your team who might benefit. And I'll turn it back to Ted to wrap us up. I'm right at the time. I'm sorry.
Hey, no, that was fantastic. Thanks so much, Darby, for sharing, and thanks for everybody who participated today. We are at time, so I'll just leave it with our next meetings are March 26th and May 28th. And we are at a new time slot, which I think might have been the reason for some of the light attendance today. We are now meeting from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern on those days, but we'll get that information out, and John, I'm sure, will get those resources posted with the recording. And thank you everybody for attending today, and we'll see you soon, and hopefully you guys will stay warm. So take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Take care.